The ice world of Glacius 7 was a planet of endless frost and howling winds, its frozen wastelands dotted with jagged peaks and vast glaciers that stretched beyond the horizon. For Eric Larson, a human ex-mercenary turned freelance explorer, it was supposed to be just another isolated contract, mapping uncharted regions for a private terraforming company. But his routine mission took a sharp turn when his rover sensors detected an unusual heat signature. An anomaly, Eric muttered, staring at the flickering display. On a planet this cold, where even his rover struggled to stay operational, anything generating heat was a curiosity worth investigating. Eric drove toward the signal, the rover's treads crunching through snow and ice. The storm that had raged for days was dying down, leaving the landscape eerily still. As he approached, the anomaly resolved itself into a figure half buried in the snow. A humanoid. Eric slammed the brakes and leaped out, the bitter cold biting at his face despite his thermal gear. He approached cautiously, his breath visible in the icy air. The figure was a woman, her shimmering, pale skin stark against the snow. Her hair, silver and faintly glowing, flowed like liquid starlight. "Hey!" Eric shouted, kneeling beside her. She was alive but barely, her breathing shallow. He noted the strange patterns etched into her skin, glowing faintly like circuitry. Whoever, or whatever she was, she clearly wasn't human. "Hang on," Eric said, scooping her into his arms. Her body was unnaturally cold, even for the planet. He hurried back to the rover, placing her in the insulated cabin and cranking the heat to maximum. The woman stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to reveal an ethereal blue glow. "Safe," she whispered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Eric stared at her for a moment, his mind racing. This wasn't a random castaway, she was someone important, and judging by her condition, she'd been left to die. But why? And by whom? The storm resumed in the distance, a reminder that time was short. Eric turned his focus to survival. "Whoever you are," he said quietly, "you've got some explaining to do." Eric's research outpost was a small, prefabricated shelter nestled in a rocky alcove, shielded from the worst of Glacius 7's relentless storms. The journey back was grueling, the rover's heater working overtime to keep its occupants alive. By the time Eric arrived, the woman's condition had stabilized, but she remained unconscious. Inside the outpost, Eric laid her on the cot and hooked up his medical scanner. The device hummed softly as it analyzed her physiology, spitting out results that made little sense to him. Her anatomy was similar to a human's, but distinctly alien. Denser bone structure, a dual heart system, and that strange bioluminescent glow in her veins. "You're not from around here," Eric muttered, running a hand through his messy hair. He turned to his computer, connecting to the limited interstellar database he had access to. A quick search revealed no matches for her species, but a deeper dive into restricted archives brought up whispers of a powerful alien empire. Visoria. The Visorians were reclusive, their rulers rumored to wield immense power. Their people were rarely seen outside their controlled territories, and their royalty even less so. Eric's stomach sank. If this woman was Visorian, and especially if she was connected to their royal family, her presence here was no accident. A soft groan pulled Eric's attention back to the cot. The woman's eyes fluttered open, the blue glow dimming as she adjusted to the warm light of the outpost. She tried to sit up, but winced, her movements sluggish. "Easy," Eric said, kneeling beside her. "You've been through hell, just lie still." She studied him, her gaze sharp despite her obvious exhaustion. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice melodic but strained. "Glacius 7, Eric replied. "A frozen rock at the edge of nowhere. I found you out in the snow. Care to explain how you got there?" Her brows furrowed, and she closed her eyes briefly as if the memory pained her. "I was sent here as punishment." "Punishment?" Eric repeated, his curiosity piqued. She nodded, her voice trembling. Was Princess Lyrian of Visoria. My uncle betrayed my family and claimed the throne. He exiled me here to eliminate me quietly." Eric leaned back, his suspicions confirmed. "A princess, huh? And I thought I was done with royalty." Lyrian's expression hardened, her regal bearing emerging despite her weakened state. "I don't expect you to believe me. But if you truly wish to help, you must understand. My survival threatens his rule. If he finds out I'm alive, he'll send forces to ensure I don't remain that way." Eric exhaled sharply, the weight of her words settling over him. He had no love for politics or royal intrigue, but leaving her to die wasn't an option. Still, helping her meant putting himself squarely in the crosshairs of a powerful enemy. "All right, princess," he said, standing. "You've got a long way to go before you're back on a throne. Let's start with keeping you alive." Lyrian's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I'll take that as a start." The icy winds outside the outpost howled like feral beasts, but inside, Eric and Lyrian worked in a fragile harmony. Lyrian, though regaining her strength, remained wary and guarded. Eric busied himself with fortifying their shelter, converting spare parts into makeshift defenses in case her uncle's forces decided to send someone to finish the job. "You're doing too much," Lyrian said one evening, her voice quiet but steady. She sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, her shimmering skin catching the faint glow of the heater. "No one asked you to fight my battles." Eric glanced up from the drone he was modifying. "No one had to. I found you half frozen in the snow. Doesn't sit right with me to walk away now." Her glowing blue eyes met his, searching for some hidden motive. "You don't even know me." "No," Eric admitted, setting down his tools. "But I've known loss, and I've known what it's like to be left behind." Lyrian didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at her hands, the faint patterns of bioluminescence dimming as her thoughts darkened. "My uncle was the one person I trusted most after my parents. I never saw his betrayal coming." Eric studied her, his voice softening. "What did he do?" She took a steadying breath. "He staged an attack on the palace, blamed it on dissidents. My father was killed in the chaos, and my mother, she was captured. I was the last obstacle to his claim to the throne, so he had me exiled here to disappear quietly." Eric leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "And your people just went along with it?" "He's charismatic," Lyrian said bitterly. "He promised stability, order, and I was painted as the naive, reckless heir who endangered our world." Eric exhaled slowly, his mind turning over the weight of her story. "Well, princess, you've got one thing going for you." She arched an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You're still alive, and if he's worried enough to exile you, it means you're a threat. We just have to figure out how to use that." As Lyrian regained her strength, Eric noticed the spark of determination returning to her. She spent hours studying the limited database of the outpost, learning Earth's history and comparing it to her own people's political systems. Eric couldn't help but admire her resilience, though he kept his thoughts to himself. One night, as the winds outside battered the outpost, Lyrian approached Eric while he worked on repairing a damaged comm array. "I need to send a signal." Eric looked up, narrowing his eyes. "A signal? To who?" "To the resistance," she said, her tone firm. "There are still those loyal to my family. If they know I'm alive, they'll rally." Eric frowned. "And if your uncle intercepts it?" "I'm willing to take that risk," Lyrian replied, her glowing eyes steady. "The resistance is our best chance. Without them, I'll never reclaim the throne." Eric sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You sure about this?" "Once that signal goes out, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," she said without hesitation. "My people deserve the truth." Eric nodded reluctantly and began configuring the comm array. The old equipment struggled to handle the encryption Lyrian provided, but after an hour of adjustments, the system was ready. Lyrian stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. "This is Princess Lyrian Telesia, rightful heir to the Vazorian throne," she began, her words clear and deliberate. "I am alive. My uncle's rule is built on lies, and I will not let his tyranny stand. To those loyal to the Telesia line, rally. Together, we can restore our world." Eric watched as she transmitted the message, the signal bouncing through the network of relays he had rigged. "That's it," he said, shutting down the array. "It's out there now." Lyrian exhaled, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over her. "Thank you, Eric." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her determined expression. "Now we wait." Hours later, the comm array pinged with an incoming message. Eric and Lyrian exchanged a glance before he opened the transmission. A holographic image of a Vizorian man appeared, his face lined with age but his expression resolute. "Your Highness," the man said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We received your signal. The resistance stands ready." Lyrian's lips parted in surprise, her resolve strengthening. "Thank you. Prepare to mobilize. I'll send coordinates for our next move." The man nodded before the transmission ended. Eric leaned back, a small smirk on his face. Looks like you've still got allies. Lyrian turned to him, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. We have a chance now, and I won't waste it. Eric's smirk faded as he met her gaze. Then we'd better be ready. Something tells me your uncle won't take this lying down. The Resistance's message was barely hours old when the storm of retribution arrived. Eric stood at the edge of the outpost, his binoculars trained on the horizon. The brutal, icy winds of Glacius 7 carried with them a faint rumble, too mechanical to be natural. We've got company, he muttered, lowering the binoculars. Lyrian joined him, her silver hair catching the dim light of the outpost's protective beacons. How many? Looks like a small detachment, Eric said. But they've brought heavy equipment, probably here to finish what your uncle started. Her glowing eyes hardened. Then we stopped them. Eric chuckled dryly, shaking his head. You're full of fire for someone who just recovered from frostbite. I'm alive because of you, she said, her tone resolute. And I'm not going to hide anymore. Eric sighed, glancing back at the reinforced shelter. Fine. But if we're doing this, we do it smart. They quickly fortified the outpost, transforming the shelter into a defensive stronghold. Eric worked on rigging makeshift traps using what supplies they had. Laser tripwires, directional charges, and strategically placed barricades. Meanwhile, Lyrian studied the terrain, using her knowledge of Zenarion tactics to predict their enemies' movements. By the time the first of the enemy dropships appeared on the horizon, the two of them were ready. The battle began with an explosive ambush. As the dropships descended, Eric triggered one of the charges, sending a plume of fire and snow into the air. The detonation disoriented the soldiers as they disembarked, giving Eric and Lyrian the upper hand. Lyrian, wielding a modified plasma rifle Eric had repaired, covered him as he moved between defensive positions. Her aim was precise, her movements fluid, a stark contrast to her earlier vulnerability. You fight like someone who's done this before, Eric said as he reloaded, ducking behind a barricade. Royal training, Lyrian replied, taking down another soldier. Being a princess isn't just about wearing crowns. Eric smirked. Good to know. The enemy forces, though better equipped, were unprepared for the ferocity of the resistance. Eric and Lyrian's coordinated efforts turned the tide, forcing the attackers to retreat. As the last dropship fled into the icy sky, Eric lowered his weapon, his breath visible in the frigid air. That was close, he muttered, turning to Lyrian. You all right? She nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the battlefield. We held them off, but they'll be back with more. The victory was short-lived. As Eric and Lyrian regrouped, the outpost sensors detected a larger fleet approaching. The sheer scale of the incoming forces left no doubt. This wasn't a cleanup crew. It was an extermination squad. We can't fight that, Eric said, his tone grim as he studied the data. Not with what we've got. Lyrian paced the room, her expression tense. Then we need to leave. If they capture me, it's over. Easier said than done, Eric replied. They'll have the airspace locked down before we even get the engines warmed up. Lyrian stopped, her gaze sharp. The glacier. Eric frowned. What about it? The ancient Zenarion outpost buried beneath it, she said. It's a research station my people abandoned centuries ago, but its systems might still be functional. If we can reactivate them, we could use the station's defenses to turn the tide. Eric hesitated, weighing the risks. If it's even still operational, and getting there won't be a walk in the park. It's our only chance, Lyrian said, her voice firm. The resistance will arrive soon. We need to hold this position until then. Eric nodded, his decision made. All right, we'll make it work. The journey to the glacier was treacherous. Eric and Lyrian navigated the harsh terrain, the wind cutting like knives as they traversed frozen cliffs and unstable ice fields. Along the way, they encountered remnants of the ancient Zenarion civilization, towering crystalline obelisks buried beneath layers of frost, their faint glow a reminder of the Empire's former glory. When they finally reached the glacier's core, Eric's breath caught at the sight of the buried station. The structure was massive, its walls shimmering with the same bioluminescent patterns as Lyrian's skin. This is it, she said, her voice tinged with awe. The heart of our legacy. Eric glanced at her, his tone curious. You think it still works? It has to, she replied. If the power core is intact, We can activate the defenses and broadcast a signal to the resistance. Inside, the station was cold and silent, its halls coated in frost. Lyrian led the way, her familiarity with the architecture guiding them to the control center. Eric worked quickly, bypassing damaged circuits and rerouting power to critical systems. The station groaned to life, its ancient machinery awakening after centuries of dormancy. As the lights flickered on, a holographic interface appeared, displaying the facility's defense systems. We've got turrets, shields, and... Eric paused, a grin spreading across his face. A planetary ion cannon. That'll do nicely. Lyrian stepped forward, her expression determined. Activate them. Let's show my uncle what happens when he underestimates us. Eric complied, his fingers flying across the console. Outside, the station's defenses roared to life, energy cannons and shields forming an impenetrable barrier. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, they had a fighting chance. As the first enemy dropships approached, Lyrian's voice echoed through the control room. This is our stand, Eric, for my people, and for everyone who believes in freedom. Eric grinned, gripping his weapon. Then let's make it count. The ancient Zenarion station was a beacon of defiance against the encroaching forces. Its defenses hummed with renewed power, energy cannons swiveling to track the enemy ships descending through the storm-laden skies. Eric and Lyrian stood in the control center, their gazes locked on the holographic display of the battlefield outside. They're coming in fast, Eric muttered, watching the glowing markers that represented the enemy fleet. If they figure out the cannon's still operational, they'll focus everything they've got on taking it out. Then we don't give them the chance, Lyrian replied, her hands flying over the controls. The station's defense grid responded to her commands, layers of shielding pulsing to full power and automated turrets firing at the first wave of dropships. The ground shook as the initial barrage from the enemy ships struck the station's shields. The energy field held, but cracks began to appear in the ice above, the vibrations threatening to destabilize the glacier's fragile structure. Eric glanced at Lyrian. We've got to move fast. If this glacier collapses, we're done. I'm aware, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. But the cannon's targeting array isn't fully aligned. Without it, we can't take out their command ship. Eric's jaw tightened. Let me handle the array. You keep the defenses running. Lyrian hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Be careful. Eric made his way through the labyrinthine corridors of the station, the ancient structure groaning as the battle raged outside. He reached the targeting array chamber, a massive dome filled with machinery that hummed with dormant power. Activating it meant exposing the array to the surface, making it vulnerable to enemy fire. As Eric worked to realign the array, enemy troops breached the station's perimeter. Lyrian's voice crackled through his comm. Eric, we've got ground forces moving in. They're targeting the main power core. I'm almost done here, Eric replied, sweat beading on his brow as he tightened the last connections. Keep them off me for a few more minutes. The targeting array powered up, beams of light aligning the cannon's sights on the enemy command ship hovering ominously in the distance. Eric grinned despite himself. That's it, we're in business. Back in the control center, Lyrian's fingers flew over the console as she directed the station's defenses to intercept the enemy ground forces. Her glowing eyes flickered with determination as she coordinated turrets, energy shields, and automated drones. Eric, the cannon is ready, she said, her voice steady despite the tension. Get back here now. On my way, Eric replied, dashing through the icy halls. He encountered a squad of enemy soldiers, but took them down with precision shots from his plasma rifle. By the time he reached the control center, his breath was ragged, but his resolve was unwavering. They're throwing everything at us, Eric said, sliding into the seat beside Lyrian. Let's give them something to remember. Lyrian activated the cannon's firing sequence. The ground beneath the station trembled as the massive weapon powered up, its energy core pulsing with light. Outside, the enemy ships scrambled to evade, but the cannon's targeting system locked onto the command ship. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Lyrian's voice rang with authority as she pressed the final command. The ion cannon unleashed a blinding beam of energy, tearing through the stormy skies and striking the enemy command ship. The vessel disintegrated in a fiery explosion, debris raining down on the battlefield below. The remaining enemy ships faltered, their formations breaking as panic spread through their ranks. "We did it," her voice a mix of relief and triumph. Eric grinned. "That's one way to send a message." The victory was short-lived as a warning alarm blared through the station. The glacier's structural integrity had been compromised by the battle, and cracks were spreading rapidly. "Lyrian, we need to evacuate," Eric said, pulling her away from the console. "The station won't hold much longer." She hesitated, her eyes lingering on the displays showing the retreating enemy forces. "What about the resistance? They'll find us," Eric said firmly. "But we won't do anyone any good if we're buried under 1,000,000 tons of ice." Lyrian nodded, and they made their way to the hangar, where a battered Xenarion shuttle waited. Eric powered up the engines as Lyrian secured their supplies. As the glacier began to collapse around them, the shuttle roared to life, lifting off just as the station's walls gave way. From the safety of the skies, they watched as the ancient structure was consumed by ice and fire. The cannon's final shot had not only secured their victory, but also left a lasting mark on their enemy. As they soared into the atmosphere, Eric glanced at Lyrian. "That was close. Too close," she admitted, her expression softening. "But we won." "For now," Eric said. "Your uncle's going to come back twice as hard after this." Lyrian's glowing eyes met his, a spark of determination in their depths. "Let him. We've proven we can fight back, and we're not done yet." Eric smiled, his grip on the controls steady. "Damn right we're not." Together they disappeared into the stars, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The shuttle emerged from hyperspace into the heart of a distant nebula, its swirling colors casting an ethereal glow over the darkness of space. Eric and Lyrian had arrived at the hidden base of the Xenarion Resistance, a massive station concealed within the nebula's natural interference. Ships of various makes and sizes flitted about, their markings unified by the symbol of the Telesia royal crest. As they docked, the atmosphere was charged with tension and anticipation. Resistance fighters lined the hangar, their expressions a mix of awe and skepticism as Lyrian stepped out, her regal bearing unmistakable. Eric followed close behind, his hand resting on his weapon in case things turned sour. Commander Valen, the grizzled leader of the Resistance, approached with measured steps. His battle-worn armor bore scars from countless skirmishes, and his piercing gaze lingered on Lyrian. Then he knelt. "Your Highness," Valen said, his voice heavy with reverence. "It is an honor to see you alive." Lyrian extended her hand, lifting him gently. "Rise, Commander. The honor is mine to see the Resistance thriving." Valen's eyes flicked to Eric. "And this is?" "A friend," Lyrian said firmly. "He saved my life and helped me get here." Eric nodded, meeting Valen's gaze without flinching. "Name's Eric Harper. Let's skip the formalities and get to the part where we figure out how to take down her uncle." Valen's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "I like him already." In the war room, the Resistance leaders gathered around a massive holographic display. Lyrian explained the events on Glacius 7, detailing her uncle's betrayal and the strategic value of the ion cannon's destruction. Eric added his perspective, pointing out weaknesses in the enemy fleet's formation based on his mercenary experience. "Our forces are strong, but we lack the element of surprise," Valen said. "If we strike directly, we risk losing everything." "Not if we give the people hope," Lyrian countered. "The people need to see that their true princess is alive and willing to fight for them. If we broadcast the truth, they'll rise." "It's a gamble," Valen said, frowning. "Your uncle will twist it against you." "Let him try," Lyrian said, her voice resolute. "I'd rather die fighting for what's right than live in hiding." Eric leaned forward, his eyes scanning the holographic map. "Then let's give them something they can't ignore. We hit his flagship, hard. If we take out his command center, the rest of his forces will fall apart." Valen nodded slowly. "It's bold, dangerous. I like it." The Resistance fleet emerged from hyperspace near Xenarion Prime, the heart of the Dominion. The planet's silver and blue surface shimmered in the distance, surrounded by the massive fleet of Lyrian's uncle. At the center of the formation loomed the Imperium Ascendant, a colossal battleship and the symbol of the usurper's power. In the lead ship's command center, Lyrian stood at the helm, her presence commanding. Eric was beside her, monitoring tactical data and ensuring their plan was airtight. The Resistance broadcast went live, Lyrian's image appearing across every corner of the Dominion. "People of Zenarion," she began, her voice filled with strength and determination. "I am Lyrian Telesia, your rightful heir. My uncle's rule is built on lies and betrayal, but today we stand together to reclaim our freedom." The broadcast sparked immediate unrest. Loyalists aboard the enemy fleet hesitated, their doubt weakening the cohesion of the usurper's forces. Meanwhile, civilian uprisings ignited across Cenarion Prime, bolstering the Resistance's momentum. "Signals from the ground are flooding in," Valen reported. "They're rising, just as you said." Lyrian's jaw tightened. "Good. Now let's end this." The battle was chaos. Resistance ships weaved through enemy fire, their smaller size and agility proving an advantage. Eric piloted a strike fighter, using his experience to take out key targets while protecting Lyrian's command ship. Inside the Imperium Ascendant, the usurper scrambled to maintain control. His forces were divided, his loyalists dwindling. When Lyrian's ship breached the battleship's defenses, she and Eric led a boarding party straight to the throne room. The confrontation was intense. The usurper, flanked by elite guards, sneered at Lyrian. "You should have stayed in exile, niece. Now you've brought ruin upon yourself." "No," Lyrian said, her voice unwavering. "I've brought justice." The battle was fierce, but Lyrian's determination and Eric's combat expertise turned the tide. As the last of the guards fell, Lyrian faced her uncle. "You've already lost," he hissed. "The people will never forgive you for this bloodshed." "They'll forgive the truth," she replied, raising her plasma blade, "and you'll never harm them again." With a swift strike, she ended his reign. Back on Zenarion Prime, the celebrations were unprecedented. Lyrian was crowned amid cheers and tears, her people hailing her as a symbol of resilience and hope. Eric stood beside her, his presence a reminder of the bond they'd forged through fire and ice. "You did it," Eric said, a rare smile crossing his face. "We did it," Lyrian corrected, her glowing eyes softening. "Stay, help me rebuild." Eric hesitated, then nodded. "For a while, someone's got to make sure you don't get into trouble." Lyrian laughed, a sound that carried the promise of a brighter future. Together, they faced the dawn of a new era, their actions a testament to the power of courage, unity, and unyielding determination.